Welcome, sleepless spirit. I'm your storyteller tonight, here to guide you gently into the shadows of slumber, where dreams take over and worries fade away. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more bedtime tales, whispered just for you. Let me know in the comments, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it as you listen tonight? And if there's a story you've been longing to hear, something spooky, something comforting, tell me. I'm always listening. Now, tuck yourself in. Let the darkness wrap around you like a warm blanket. It's time to let go and drift into the story. I was 11 the first time I stayed an entire weekend alone with my great-grandmother, Miriam. Not my grandmother. She'd passed away when I was 5, but her mother. My mom always called her Nana, so I did, too. She was 84, lived alone in a small town called Elmsfield, tucked along the Pennsylvania countryside near the Maryland border. One of those places with one diner, one church, and one gas station. Blink and you miss it. My parents hadn't left me there out of convenience. They had to fly to Florida for my uncle's emergency surgery, and they couldn't take me along. Too stressful, too much waiting around in hospitals. Nana offered. She, be fine here, she'd said in that delicate, stern voice of hers. It'll be good for both of us. I remember the drive up clearly, winding roads flanked by collapsing barns, rusting silos, and that constant buzz of sickers. It was early August, and the heat was thick like syrup, the kind that stuck to your skin and made your t-shirt cling to your back. As we pulled into a long gravel driveway, her house emerged like something out of a faded photograph. 2 stories, narrow porch, white paint flaking off the siding, like old snow. It was one of those houses that creaked even when nobody was moving and smelled like lavender, dust, and wood polish. Don't let her tire you out too much, my mom had joked, giving me a kiss on the head. She's the one who better keep up. I'd sighed. Nana greeted me at the door in her usual long dress and cardigan. Her white hair pinned back perfectly, not a strand out of place. Her eyes were pale blue, the kind that looked through you a little too easily. We spent most of that Friday evening in the sitting room. She had no TV, only a radio and a worn collection of hardback books with cracked spines. She told me stories from her childhood during the war, made us tea, even though it was hot out, and insisted we sit at the table when we ate. She always made everything by hand, stews, biscuits, blackberry preserves she kept in glass jars on a shelf by the window. The house was quiet. No humming appliances, no traffic outside, just the tick of the wall clock and the chirping of the woods behind the property. That first night, I slept in the guest room upstairs just beside hers. It had an old metal-framed bed, a quilt that smelled like cedar, and a porcelain doll perched on the dresser that I turned to face the wall before climbing under the covers. Everything felt old, but it wasn't scary, not yet. Saturday morning, we had oatmeal with raisins and cinnamon for a breakfast, and I helped her hang laundry on the line in the backyard. She had this way of folding everything just right, smoothing every crease with her palms like she was handling something sacred. Around noon, a black car pulled up. Nana stood on the porch with a cold expression as 2 men got out. One was older, balding with a limp. The other was in a crisp grey suit that looked out of place in the heat. Neither smiled. You stay inside, she told me quietly. No matter what. I watched through the front curtains as she spoke to them. Not like old friends, more like co-workers. There was tension in her shoulders, the kind you don't notice unless you're paying attention. After about 15 minutes, they got back in the car and left. Who were they? I asked as she came back inside. Church elders, she said, pouring herself a glass of water. But they didn't look like preachers. She didn't answer. That afternoon, we baked bread together. She let me knead the dough, even though I was terrible at it. We played cards by candlelight after the sun set. It was almost like a vacation, like some gentle little time capsule, until that night, Saturday night, 1:42 a. I woke up in a sweat. The room was hot, the air still. My mouth was bone dry. I sat up, rubbed my eyes, and reached for the glass of water Nana had left on the knitstand. Empty. I debated trying to fall back asleep, but my tongue felt like sandpaper. So, I climbed out of bed, padded barefoot across the old wooden floor, and cracked open the guest room door. The hallway was pitch black. I used my phone's screen to guide me, careful not to trip over the hallway rug. I descended the stairs slowly, one hand on the banister, each step groaning under my weight. That's when I heard it, a low humming. I paused halfway down. The light from the downstairs parlor flickered. Not like the steady light of a lamp, more like candlelight. Dancing shadows on the walls. I leaned over the railing to see. My blood ran cold. There were 7 people standing in a circle in the living room, men and women all dressed in dark robes. Their hoods were up. In the center stood Nana, her hands folded, eyes closed, lips moving in a soundless chant. I ducked, heart slamming in my chest. This wasn't a dream. This was real. The humming rose. One of the hooded figures pulled something from their robe, a jar or maybe a goblet. It shimmered dark red in the flickering light. They passed it one by one. Each person took a sip. When it reached Nana, she paused, held it to her lips, drank. I backed up. My foot hit the edge of a loose floorboard. It groaned loudly. The humming stopped. Silence. I flattened against the wall, not breathing. Seconds passed, then footsteps coming toward the stairs. I turned and bolted silently back to my room, shutting the door and climbing into bed. Heart hammering so hard I thought I might pass out. I didn't sleep, not a minute. Sunday morning. When sunlight finally filtered through the curtains, I got up, dressed, and packed my bag. I didn't speak, not even when Nana knocked gently on my door and said breakfast was ready. I was downstairs at 8 o'clock sharp when my parents pulled up. I practically ran to the car. Nana came out to see us off, hands folded in front of her like always. My mom chatted with her while my dad loaded the bags. Then she walked over to my window, leaning in through the glass. She smiled sweetly and whispered, "The floorboards creak louder than you think, sweetheart." She patted my shoulder and walked away. 2 weeks later, Nana died in her sleep, peacefully. The doctor said, "Heart failure, Art." We attended her funeral at the old stone chapel in Elmsfield. It was a quiet service, only a few relatives and neighbors, but a few unfamiliar faces lingered in the back rows. A tall man with silver hair, a woman with a cane, another in a navy suit. I recognized them. They'd been in that circle. They didn't speak to anyone, just stood, listened, and left. I never told my parents. I wanted to many times, but every time I tried, the words caught in my throat. What would I even say? That Nana drank blood in the living room at night, that she whispered something chilling the day after, that she was part of something. I looked through her old books once, months later, when my mom brought home a box of her things. Most were religious psalms, hymns, devotionals, but tucked between, to dusty cookbooks, was a leather-bound journal, handwritten. Dozens of pages filled with dates, names, and symbols, circles, triangles with eyes, names I didn't recognize. There was one entry near the end written just weeks before I stayed with her. "The children are watching. They always watch, but only a few ever truly see. If she sees, she will remember. She will know. She will carry it forward whether she chooses to or not. Some things are not blood taught, but blood known, blood known." I shut the book. I didn't open it again. Now it's been 12 years. I'm 23, living in the city. I still think about her, especially at night when everything gets quiet and my mind wanders. I think about what she whispered to me. I think about the circle of people in the red liquid, and I think about the dreams. Sometimes I wake up and I'm standing in a circle. The humming surrounds me. The taste of something metallic lingers on my tongue. There are 7 others. One looks just like Nana, Sometimes I see myself holding the jar and sometimes I drink. I tell myself it's just stress memory playing tricks, but I haven't told anyone. Not yet, because deep down, a part of me wonders if maybe the floorboards weren't the only thing that creaked that night. If maybe something opened, and maybe it hasn't closed. I was never close to my grandfather growing up. Not because of anything he did exactly, but because of how quiet he was. He wasn't a warm man. He never hugged me, never ruffled my hair or gave out candy the way other grandpas did. He was stern, cold, built from old wood and silence. My mom once said his name was Franklin Mororo, and he lived alone on a plot of land just outside Ashland, Mississippi, surrounded by woods, empty fields, and the rusting ghosts of machinery that hadn't worked since the 80s. Twice a year, spring and late fall, we'd make the 8-hour drive from Atlanta to visit him. My mom always insisted on it. Even though she and her father didn't speak much during those trips, my dad would try to help with the upkeep. I'd help gather eggs or milk the goat, and my little brother, Aaron, 3 years younger, would spend most of the visit trailing after me, begging to play or explore. That year I was 16. Aaron was 13, and we were visiting Franklin's farm for what would unknowingly be the last time. Franklin had lived out there by himself for over 20 years. My mom told me once after a few glasses of wine that he'd always been different. He didn't believe in grocery stores, refused phones or computers, and distrusted banks. He'd been divorced from my grandmother since before I was born, but no one leaves a man like Franklin unless they got a damn good reason. She'd muttered that night, but he wasn't scary, just removed. He wore the same dark overalls every day, a leather belt thick as a garden hose, and boots so worn they looked part of his skin. His house was small, wood-panelled with creaky floors, in one working bathroom. Behind house, past the chicken coop and goat pen, was a shed. A faded red thing slanted from years of wind with a rusted lock that was almost always fastened. I remember asking Franklin once what was inside. "That's where the animals go when it's time," he said. "Time for what?" "Time to stop living." I remember the way he said it. Not cold, not cruel, just matter of fact. Like he was telling me the sky was blue. The day it happened was hot. One of those sticky swamp air afternoons that made your clothes clink. My dad was helping Franklin fix a down fence on the south pasture. Mom was inside prepping beans and cornbread. That left me and Aaron outside tossing a football. Aaron had a bad throw. A wild one that veered hard left, bounced once in the grass and skidded up against the door of the shed. "Nice one," I groaned. "Go get it," he yelled, grinning. I jogged over to grab it. But as soon as I reached for the ball, something strange washed over me, a pull. Not just curiosity, but something deeper, like the shed itself was waiting. I glanced back at the house. Nobody was looking. "Aaron," I called out, "come here." He jogged over, squinting. "What? You ever wonder what's really in there?" He froze. "We're not supposed to." "I'll be quick," I said, already reaching for the door. To our surprise, it wasn't locked. The metal latch clicked open with one pull. The door creaked slowly on its hinges. The air that came out was cool, dusty, and stale like earth and copper. We both hesitated before stepping in. There were no hooks, no saws, no tables or bloodstains. In fact, the shed was nearly empty except for a big pile of old dry hay covering the far corner. "Guess he hasn't used this in a while," I muttered. "Thought he killed stuff in here," Aaron said. We turned to leave, but something made Aaron stop. "Wait," he whispered. He moved toward the hay pile, kneeling. "There's something under here." "A raccoon nest or something," I said. "Number plastic." I walked over just as he pulled back a heavy clump of hay, revealing a weathered plastic bin with no lid. Inside were dozens, maybe over 100 driver's licenses. We both knelt down. I picked one up. A woman, late 20s, blonde hair, Georgia license. Aaron pulled out another different woman, then another, and another. All women, all different, all strangers. "What the hell is this?" Aaron asked, his voice tight. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My hands were shaking as I flipped through the IDs. They were real. Old but real. Some laminated, some bent, some with corners burnt off or scratched out. I didn't say a word, just gently pushed them back into the bin, covered it with hay, and stood up. "Come on," I said. "We're not supposed to be in here." Aaron followed, pale-faced. That night, neither of us could sleep. Around 2 a.m., I got up to pee. The bathroom window overlooked the side field. And as I finished washing my hands, something caught my eye. Movement, a figure walking across the dark yard, flashlight off. Slow, deliberate, head low. Franklin. He made his way to the shed, unlatched the door, and disappeared inside. But just before he did, he paused and looked directly at the house, directly at me. Or at least it felt that way. I ducked down behind the sink, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, Franklin acted normal, fixed the coop fence, talked to my dad about rain barrels. When I tried to bring up the shed, he cut me off fast. "Don't go snooping where you don't belong," he said, not even turning his head. Aaron avoided eye contact with him completely. That night, I locked our bedroom door. A week later, we went home. 2 months after that, my mom got the call. Franklin had passed away. Heart failure, died in his sleep. A neighbor who checked in on him every month had found the body. We drove back up for the funeral and to help clean out the house. The shed was unlocked now. The padlock had been removed. I waited until everyone else was inside, then made my way out there. But when I pulled back the hay, the bin was gone. No trace of it, no dust marks, no depression in the floorboards. Just hay, clean, undisturbed. I didn't say anything to anyone, neither did Aaron. Not then, not ever. But I've thought about it for years. Sometimes I wonder if the licenses were victims, missing persons, runaways, hitchhikers who trusted the wrong man. Maybe Franklin didn't always live alone. Maybe he had visitors, unwelcome, unrecorded ones. I've Googled what I could remember from those IDs, names, states, but nothing ever came up. It haunts me, not because I think Franklin was a monster, but because I'll never really know, and not knowing. That is what gnaws at me. Aaron, and I made a pact never to tell anyone, not my parents, not the police, nothing. But every time I hear a story on the news about a woman gone missing off a highway, or never coming home from a road trip, I wonder, and I remember those IDs lying quietly buried in hay in the shed behind my grandfather's house. I was 17 the summer. My grandpa died, and that was the year everything changed. My name's Lauren Mendoza. I grew up in a quiet, working-class neighborhood in Garland, Texas. My mom worked as a receptionist at a dental office, and my dad was a forklift operator at a distribution center. We didn't have much, but we were close. Every weekend we'd drive out to Rockwall, about 30 minutes away, where my grandma lived in a little brick house just outside the city limits. Her name was Anita Ramos, but I always called her Abuetita. She used to bake sweet bread from scratch garden every morning and had this infectious laugh that you could hear through walls. My grandpa Hector passed away from a stroke in 2018, and after that she lived alone, but she was tough. She was one of those old-school Catholic women, rosaries on every wall, a St. Jude candle on her nightstand, always quoting scripture when you least expected it. Even when she started having trouble with her hip and walking became painful, she refused to move in with us. Then came the diagnosis. It was a rare, aggressive type of breast cancer. Stage 3 by the time they found it. It hit us like a brick. My mom broke down the night we got the call from the doctor, and my dad went quiet in a way I wasn't used to. Abuelita, though, she didn't flinch. She said God would see her through it. They admitted her to the oncology unit at Lakeside Regional Hospital. It was clean, well lit, and just cold enough to make you uncomfortable. The chemo started right away. because my parents both worked full-time and my younger brother was still in middle school. I started visiting her alone on the weekends. I'd bring her crossword books, warm socks, and read her the Bible, mostly from John or Psalms, her favorites. She'd hold my hand, smile faintly, and sometimes mumble a prayer under her breath while I read. That July, something changed. Her weight dropped quickly, 15, maybe 20 pounds in 2 weeks. Her cheeks hollowed. She started saying strange things between naps, things like, "There's something wrong with the mirror," or, "I saw Hector in the corner last night, but he wouldn't come near me." I chalked it up to the chemo or maybe a bad dream. I didn't want to believe it could be anything else. But one Saturday night, I learned better. It was around 10:15 p.m. when I got to the hospital. Visiting hours technically ended at 9 o'clock, but the nurses knew me by then and let me stay late as long as I stayed quiet. Her room was dim. Just a glow of the monitor and a soft lamp by the sink. She was lying, on her side, eyes half closed. She looked fragile. "Hi, Abuita," I whispered, setting down my backpack. She opened her eyes slowly, smiled just a bit. "Mingle, you came back," she rasped. "I brought your favorite," I said, pulling a small book of Psalms from my bag. "Want me to read?" She nodded. I sat in the chair beside her bed and started reading, aloud, letting my voice fill the room like a lullaby. She closed her eyes, her lips moving silently. Around 11:30, she was fast asleep, her breathing shallow but steady. I leaned back in the chair and dozed off myself. I don't know how long I slept, but when I jolted awake, the room felt wrong. The clock on the wall said 12:41 a.m. and Abuitita's bed was empty. At first, I thought maybe a nurse had taken her for tests, but the IV stand was still there, connected to nothing. Her rosary beads lay tangled on the bed. I stood up slowly. "Abuelita," I called out. No answer. I walked to the bathroom door in her room and knocked. "Are you in there?" Nothing. I tried the handle. It was unlocked and empty. That's when I heard it. Laughter. High-pitched, childlike, familiar. It echoed softly like it was coming from the room itself. I froze. "Abuelita," I said, heart pounding. No answer. Just another peal of that strange off-kilter laughter. I turned slowly toward the bed again. The sheets were wrinkled like someone had just climbed out, but there was no one there. The sound came again, this time from fuel behind the bed. There was a narrow space between the bed and the back wall, maybe a foot and a half at most. I leaned over to peek, expecting maybe to see a dropped pillow or something. What I saw instead made me scream. Abuita was crouched in the gap, completely naked, knees tucked under her chin. She was smiling at me. Her lips were dark, wet. Her forearms were covered in bite marks, deep, ragged. Blood trickled down both arms. She rocked gently, giggling like a little girl. Her eyes were wide and glassy, and she whispered, "Hector said it would hurt, but it feels good now." I backed away so fast I nearly tripped. I sprinted out of the room and down the hall to the nurse's station, yelling for help. Security rushed in, followed by 2 nurses. They had to sedate her to get her out from behind the bed. She fought them, snarling like an animal. They wrapped her in heated blankets, cleaned the wounds, and moved her to a psychiatric observation wing. The next morning, the attending oncologist called my mom and said the episode was likely caused by chemoindus delirium. He said some patients, especially elderly ones, can develop brief psychotic breaks. But biting herself like that, hiding behind the bed, laughing, none of that felt brief or clinical. It felt wrong. She didn't remember a thing. 2 weeks later, her condition improved enough that they released her into a care facility. We visited every other day. She never mentioned the night it happened. Every time I tried to bring it up, she'd tilt her head like I was speaking another language. One Sunday, I brought her a new rosary. She took it slowly like it weighed 50 pounds, Her hand trembled as she kissed across. Then she said softly, "Something crawled into me, Myha, the night I saw Hector. But it's gone now." And that was the only thing she ever said about it. Now it's 2025. Abuita lives with us. She's 82. Her cancer has been in remission for nearly 4 years. 4 years. She's mostly herself again. Laughs, tells stories, makes panduli on Sundays. But sometimes when I walk past her room late at night, I hear her whispering to someone who isn't there. And twice now, I've found blood in her sink. Just little smears like from a bitten lip or a scraped palm. When I asked her about it last week, she looked me dead in the eye and said, "Some things don't leave Myha. They just hide in your bones." I haven't slept well since, and I never ever read from the Bible in her room anymore because I don't want to wake up to that laughter again. Not ever. I was 10 years old when my mother went into labor with my baby sister. It was early spring, I remember, because I was still wearing my winter jacket, but the snow had started to melt into slushy puddles in our driveway. My dad burst into my room sometime around midnight, his voice louder than usual, but not panicked. "Hey, bud, wake up. We got to go." I sat up groggy. "Go where?" "Your mom's contractions are close. We're going to the hospital right now." He nodded as he hurriedly threw clothes into a duffel bag. "Yeah, right now. But I can't leave you here alone, so I'm taking you to Grandma Jean's." That made me sit up straighter. Grandma Jean, not Grandma Carol. My mom's mom, who lived 15 minutes away and gave me jelly beans whenever I visited. No, this was my dad's mom, the one I barely knew. The one who always smelled like dried flowers and talked so quietly. "She lives an hour away." I said it's only 40 minutes, and she's up anyway. She said she'd be happy to watch you. I didn't argue, but I felt weird about it. I hadn't been to her house more than twice in my life. She lived in a quiet little neighborhood outside Milltown, New Jersey, one of those rural areas where the streetlights were sparse and the trees crowded the road like they were watching you. By the time we pulled into her driveway, it was past 1 o'clock a.m. Her porch light was on, but the windows were dark. She opened the front door just as we pulled up. "There you are," she said with a strange kind of smile. Come in. You both look like ghosts in this moonlight." My dad gave me a hug and promised he'd come get me as soon as the baby was born. I watched the taillights of our car disappear down the road, feeling suddenly very alone. Zhong's house was quiet, almost too quiet, the kind of quiet where even your breath sounds like noise. She lived alone in a 2-story colonial that smelled like wood polish and lavender. The walls were covered in framed cross-stitch patterns and faded photos of people didn't recognize. "I've made up the guest room for you," she said, leading me upstairs. "But you must be hungry first. Want something sweet?" I shook my head, but she disappeared into the kitchen anyway. When she returned, she was holding a bowl of ice cream and a steaming mug. "Chocolate chip," she said cheerfully, setting the bowl on the coffee table. "And I made you something special. Chamomile with valerian root. It'll help you relax." "I'm not really tired," I lied. The tea smelled off. It reminded me of wet leaves or old socks. Jean sat down across from me and watched. "You don't have to finish the ice cream, but drink the tea, darling. It's good for the nerves." Reluctantly, I lifted the mug. I'd never tasted anything so bitter. It coated my tongue like thick syrup, leaving a sour aftertaste that made me gag. I set it down. "I don't like it." "It's an acrid taste," she said softly, "but you'll sleep like a baby." I promise I didn't want to argue, so I took another sip. She didn't blink. Her eyes were locked on mine the entire time, like she was waiting for something. When I reached the bottom of the mug, my stomach lurched. "I think I'm going to be sick," I mumbled. Jean stood up and placed her hand on my shoulder, guiding me toward the stairs. No, you'll be fine. Let's get you to bed." The world blurred as I climbed. My legs felt heavy. My arms tingled. The last thing I remember is dropping the mug, hearing it shatter on the hardwood and seeing her face, still smiling before everything faded to black. When I woke up, the sun was bleeding through the curtains. I was in a bed I didn't recognize, dressed in silk pajamas I knew weren't mine. The air smelled like powder and old blankets. I blinked against the light, my head pounding. Then I saw her. Jean was sitting in a wooden rocking chair at the foot of the bed, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Her eyes were fixed on me unblinking. "Good morning," she said, her voice slow and distant. "You out like a light." "Why am I in this bed?" I asked. "This is my room. It's the warmest in the house." "But I thought you had a guest room." "I do, but I wanted to keep an eye on you just in case." I sat up slowly. My body ached. My mouth was dry. I looked around for my clothes, my backpack, anything. "I want to go see Mom and Dad," I said. She didn't answer. "I want to go," I repeated, swinging my legs over the side of the bed. Jean stood as well. "Let's have some tea first, okay? Then I'll take you." "I don't want tea," I said. She took a step closer. "It's good for you." My heart was stewing now. Something was off. I didn't feel safe. I stood up and backed toward the door. "I really need to go. I think my dad's waiting." "He's not," she said flatly. "He'll be at the hospital 4 hours. They have to check your mother and the baby has to come out. These things take time." I kept backing away. "I don't care. I want to go." Jean's face changed. Just a flicker, but enough. A shadow behind her eyes, her jaw clenched. "You're acting like a brat," she said more sternly. "Now, I've gone through all this trouble, and you can't even be polite." She followed me down the stairs, step by step. I ran into the kitchen before she could block the door. The mug was already on the table. Steam rose from the dark liquid. She handed it to me. "Just drink it," she said. "You'll feel better." My hands shook. I took the mug, but didn't sip. "Can I use the bathroom?" She raised an eyebrow. "Don't try anything funny." I nodded and slipped away. The moment I was out of sight, I dumped the tea into the sink. I rinsed the mug and filled it with cold water. When I returned to the living room, I sipped it slowly, watching her expression. Her eyes narrowed, but she said nothing. I think she knew. I just don't think she cared anymore. A knock sounded on the door. Hard, sharp. My father. The moment the door opened, I ran into his arms. "Take me home, please." Jean stood a few feet behind, her smile frozen in place. She didn't say a word. My dad looked confused, but I didn't care. On the ride to the hospital, I told him everything. The tea, the pajamas, waking up in her bed. He shook his head slowly. "She probably just got confused," he muttered. "She's been off since your grandfather passed." "But why would she drug me?" I asked, voice breaking. "Why did she stare at me all night?" He didn't answer. "That was the last time I saw her. We stopped visiting altogether after my sister was born." My dad avoided the topic. "My mom never liked her to begin with, so she didn't push." 2 years later, Jean died in a sleep. Natural causes, they said. We didn't go to the funeral. Years passed. I tried to forget it, but sometimes in the middle of the night, I'll jolt awake, gasping, trembling, swearing I can still taste that bitter tea at the back of my throat. And I wonder what would have happened if I drank that second cup. I didn't grow up seeing my grandparents often, not because of a family feud or anything dramatic like that, just distance. My mom's parents, Susan and Walter, lived in a quiet senior community called Cypress Reach, nestled in the suburbs of Gulfview, Georgia. We lived 12 hours away in rural Kentucky, where life was all rolling fields, creaky porches, and cicadas screaming. In the summer heat, money was tight growing up. Plane tickets weren't casual purchases, and with my parents working full-time and raising 2 kids, it just wasn't easy to make the trip. We usually only saw my grandparents once a year, sometimes during Christmas, sometimes not at all. They'd send cards, of course, and gifts on birthdays. And they'd call every now and then, though my sister and I didn't really know them well. They were more like polite acquaintances with a shared bloodline than close family. That wasn't necessarily anyone's fault. It was just how things turned out. But when I was 14 and my sister Zoe was 12, they called my parents one June afternoon and asked if we could come visit them for a week during summer break. Just us, no parents. They said they wanted to finally spend real time with their grandchildren, get to know us, bond. I remember Mom hesitating. I overheard her whispering to Dad that she thought it was weird they'd suddenly want us to visit alone, especially since they'd never really made the effort before, but in the end, they said yes. They probably thought we were old enough now to handle it, and it wasn't like my grandparents were strangers. Plus, they figured it as a nice break for everyone. Zoe and I were excited, even if we were a little unsure. I had never flown before. We didn't really know what to expect, but the idea of getting out of Kentucky for a week and experiencing Florida sun, we thought it was Florida at the time. It wasn't, was enough to make us overlook any anxiety. The flight itself was smooth. My palms were sweaty during takeoff, but Zoe was braver than I expected, nose pressed to the window like a golden retriever in a car. When we landed at Gulfview Regional Airport, our grandparents were already waiting just past security, holding a sign that said, "Welcome, Maddie and Zoe," in glittery marker. They hugged us tightly, a little too long, maybe, and commented over and over again on how grown-up we looked. I remember noticing the scent of rose water and talcum powder on my grandmother's coat and the sharp cologne my grandfather wore that burned my nose just a bit. Their home was in a community that required you to be over 55 to live there. The kind with pastel-cold houses, perfectly manicured lawns, and little winding streets named after birds. Blue Heron Lane, Osprey Circle, Egret Way. Their house sat at the corner of Sandpiper Bend. 2 bedrooms, lots of ceramic figurines, everything immaculately clean. There was something about the silence of that place. It was thick, heavy, even. With the windows open, the first day went by normally. They made us grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup for lunch. They showed us where the spare towels were and helped us unpack. Grandma had even gone through the trouble of getting some books and puzzles for us, and Pop, as he insisted we call him, pulled out an old deck of cards and taught us how to play rummy on the back porch. That night after dinner, they brought us upstairs to the guest room we'd be sharing. It had twin beds, floral comforters, and a little window that overlooked a palm tree in the yard. As they turned to leave, Grandma paused at the doorway. "You girls sleep tight, okay," she said with a smile. "Just don't come out of your room during the night, all right?" No matter what, she said it like it was a joke, but she didn't laugh. I looked at Zoe, expecting her to giggle or say something sarcastic, but she just looked confused, the same way I felt. We said, "Okay," and they shut the door. That night, I woke up to the sound of something downstairs. It wasn't loud exactly, more like rhythmic murmuring, repeating syllables. I stared at the ceiling for a minute, trying to convince myself it was the TV, but it didn't sound like dialogue. It sounded ancient. Zoe was asleep, her arm curled under her pillow. I didn't want to wake her over nothing. I told myself our grandparents probably fell asleep watching some weird show. I put a pillow over my head and eventually drifted back to sleep. The next few days were quiet, normal, mostly. We went to the beach one afternoon, but Pop got a nosebleed and wanted to leave early. Another time, we went to a local flea market, but I noticed they never seemed to know anyone. In a neighborhood full of retirees, you'd think they'd have some friends, but they never waved at anyone. No one waved at them. Even the neighbors we passed seemed to close their curtains when they noticed us. And then there were the rules. No wandering outside after dinner. No opening the blinds at night. No leaving our room until morning, retired. Folks like their privacy, Pop said. People don't like being seen late at night. He smiled when he said it, but it didn't reach his eyes. On the fourth night, I woke up again. This time, it wasn't murmuring. It was chanting loud and clear. It came from below us. And it wasn't just the voices anymore. It was many men and women, all in unison, repeating syllables that didn't belong to any language I recognized. The cadence was hypnotic and low, vibrating. I sat up, heart racing. Zoe was already awake, sitting up in her bed. "You hear that?" she whispered. I nodded. "What are they doing?" she asked. I didn't answer. I got up, crept over to the door, and placed my ear against it. The chanting was definitely coming from the living room, or maybe below it. "We should go back to sleep," I said. "Maybe it's just I want to see," Zoe said. We argued in whispers. I told her it was a terrible idea, but she was already out of bed. Tiptoeing to the door, I followed. Of course, I did. We moved slowly down the hall, then the stairs, each creak of the old wood making my stomach twist. When we reached the bottom, we peeked around the corner. The living room had been rearranged, all the furniture pushed back. Candles lined the walls and the coffee table, and in the center, sitting in a wide circle, were our grandparents and at least 12 other elderly people we had never seen before. They were all dressed in black. Their eyes were shut, their mouths moved in perfect unison. The air smelled like smoke, and something metallic dot the center of their circle held a shallow wooden bowl filled with dark red liquid. As we watched, one man reached into his shirt and pulled out a small blade. Without flinching, he cut his own palm and let his blood drip into the bowl. I gasped aloud. The chanting stopped, heads turned, eyes opened. I grabbed Zoe's hand, and we bolted up the stairs. I don't remember touching the steps. We didn't stop running until we slammed our door shut and locked it. We didn't speak that night. We barely slept. And the next morning, everything was back to normal. They never said a word. Neither did we. We played rummy. We went to lunch. They smiled and acted like everything was fine. But something had changed. Grandma's smiles were tighter. Pop kept glancing at us when he thought we weren't looking. That night, we pushed the dresser in front of our door. Our parents picked us up 3 days later. As soon as we got in the car, we begged them not to send us back. We didn't explain everything. How could we? But we told them we didn't feel safe. They thought we were being dramatic. Said we were probably just homesick, but they never made us visit again. We don't talk about that summer anymore. Zoe and I are both adults now. She's in college. I live on my own. Every now and then, we'll text each other late at night and bring it up in code. "Remember Cypress Reach?" One of us will say. "Still gives me chills." The other will respond. I tried to look it up once. Cypress Reach. There's no mention of it anymore. No listings. No satellite images. Nothing. It's like the whole place was erased. But sometimes, when I close my eyes and let my mind drift back to that candle-lit room, I wonder what would have happened if we hadn't run. If we had stayed in the doorway just a few moments longer. If we had watched what they were summoning. And I wonder just sometimes if something followed us home anyway. I never really knew my grandmother. Not in the way most people talk about theirs. Her name was Esther Weller, and she lived in a small town just outside Roanoke, Virginia, in an old house that looked like it had been dragged out of another century. Growing up, my mom didn't talk much about her side of the family, and we only visited Grandma Esther once when I was about 8. I only remember her offering me some strange herbal tea and scolding my mom for letting me eat fast food. She wasn't mean, just intense. She wore long flowing skirts and always smelled like cloves and burnt wood. Her house was full of old books, jars of dry plants, stones, candles, and things I didn't recognize even as an adult. She died in early spring last year. Cancer. Mom told me she refused chemotherapy. Said she had her own ways of dealing with illness. By the time she was taken to the hospital, it was too late. She passed quietly. I wasn't sure how to feel. She was family, but she was practically a stranger. After the funeral, which was held on a grey, drizzly Thursday, Mom asked me if I could help her sort through some of Grandma's things. She was selling the house to cover debts and wanted to clear it out. I agreed. I had a few days off work, and honestly, part of me was curious. What kind of woman leaves behind a house that looks like a haunted postcard? I still don't understand why you never brought us here more, I said as we pulled into the gravel driveway. Mom didn't answer right away. The windshield wipers thumped back and forth against the misty glass. Then she said it wasn't a place for kids. My mother, she was complicated. That was the understatement of the year. The house sat at the top of a slight hill surrounded by tall skeletal trees just beginning to bud. It was 2 stories, wooden, painted a faded white with green trim, and had one of those wraparound porches with a swing hanging from a rusted chain. Morse climbed the stone foundation, and every window had old lace curtains that looked like they hadn't been touched in years. Inside smelled like cedar, herbs, and something slightly sour, like dried fruit left out too long. Dust floated in the air, and wooden floorboards groaned under our feet. We started going through boxes, and for the first couple of hours, it was nothing but books, jars of dried roots, and old letters written in chicken scratch handwriting. Then we found the jewelry box. It was in her bedroom, hidden in the top drawer of her old mahogany dresser. The box was heavy and carved with strange symbols I didn't recognize. Nothing I'd ever seen in any religion or culture I knew. Inside were a few rings, a pair of onyx earrings, and a necklace. The necklace stood out immediately. It was a gold chain with a large blood-red ruby encased in a round brass setting. Despite the dim light in the room, it sparkled like fresh glass. There was a faint warmth to it, almost like it had been sitting in sunlight even though the room was cold. "Wow," I murmured, picking it up. Mom took a step back. "Don't put that on," she said, her voice sharper than I expected. I laughed. "It's just a necklace." She used to say it was a guardian stone, Mom said. Folding her arms, she claimed it protects or curses depending on who wears it. Curses. She believed in a lot of things. Stones, spirits, energy transfer. Said if you wore it without respect, it could draw out your worst self. I held it up to my neck, teasing like a haunted amulet. "I'm serious, Claire." The way she said my name stopped me. I put the necklace back in the box. That night, we stayed at a hotel in town. But the image of the necklace stuck with me. I couldn't stop thinking about it. It felt stupid, but something about that ruby. It was beautiful in a way that got under your skin. That night, I dreamt about it sitting on a white pedestal, glowing faintly, almost pulsing like a heartbeat. The next morning, Mom had to leave early for a meeting back home. She asked if I'd be okay finishing up the attic alone. I said, sure. When she left, I went straight back to that bedroom. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe it was boredom. Maybe it was something else. I took the necklace out and fastened it around my neck. It was heavier than I remembered, but it felt good, like it belonged there. For the next few hours, I didn't think about it much. I sorted papers, old photo albums, and a few cracked vinyl records. But by noon, I started to feel off. It began with a headache, a slow, pulsing one right behind my eyes. Then my throat started to feel tight, scratchy. I chalked it up to the dust in the house. I hadn't eaten much either, but then I noticed something. In the bathroom mirror, a small clump of hair on the shoulder of my sweater. My stomach twisted. I ran my fingers through my hair and pulled out a few more strands without even trying. "Okay," I said out loud, trying to laugh. "That's enough." I took the necklace off and set it on the counter. Immediately, the headache dulled. Coincidence? I told myself. Allergic reaction maybe. I put it back on. 5 minutes later, I felt nauseous. I yanked it off and shoved it into my purse. I drove back to the hotel, but couldn't shake the feeling I'd done something wrong. I kept thinking of my grandmother, how she always said She could feel when something was off. That night, I had a dream, not vivid, not strange, just disturbing in how real it felt. In the dream, I was in her house, standing in front of the mirror in her bedroom. I looked older, much older. My skin was sagging. My hair was gone. My eyes were sunken in. I reached up to touch my face and felt my teeth come loose. They dropped into my hand like rotten seeds. I woke up screaming. I touched my face, my hair, my teeth, all still there. But the feeling didn't go away. Over the next few days, I dove into the journals we found in a trunk in her attic. She'd written hundreds of entries, some date o' day, some filled with strange symbols and notations. There were passages about protection spells, herbs that could bind illness to a vessel, and notes about an anchor stone. One line stuck out to me, scribbled in the margin of a page. If she ever inherits the ruby, tell her never to wear it, unless her mind is clear and her spirit open. The ruby doesn't lie, it amplifies. Fear, illness, guilt. It will feed on the cracks. It hit me like a punch to the stomach. I was grieving. I didn't even realize it. I hadn't cried once since the funeral, but the moment I read that, I broke down. I missed her. I missed what we could have had. And deep down, I think a part of me knew I wasn't ready to carry anything of hers yet. Not the house, not the stories, and definitely not that necklace. I had one more night to stay before the property manager came to lock things up. That evening, I decided to burn some of her old herbs. I wasn't sure why, maybe out of respect, maybe for closure. I found a bundle wrapped in twine labeled cleansing. I lit it and walked through each room, waving the smoke through the air. When I got to her bedroom, the necklace was on the bed. I hadn't put it there. I stared at it for a long time, then I picked it up one last time. It felt quiet, heavy, like it was waiting. I didn't put it on. Instead, I wrapped it in cloth, tied it with black thread, the way she'd done with other powerful items, and buried it in the backyard beneath her favorite tree. I whispered her name and thanked her. The next morning, I woke up feeling light, like something had finally passed. It's been almost a year. I kept one of her journals, a small one filled with pressed flowers and quiet thoughts. I read it when I need to feel close to her. Sometimes I still dream of the necklace, but in the dreams, it's always far away behind glass or buried in the earth. I don't know if the necklace really had power or if it was just my mind unraveling under stress. But I do know this, some things aren't meant to be inherited. They're meant to be laid to rest. And I never really knew my grandparents well. Growing up, my parents were always a bit vague about them. They weren't estranged exactly, just distant, like a blurry photograph left out in the rain. My dad was their only child, and when I asked why we didn't visit them more, he'd always say something like, "They like to be left alone." But that changed in the spring of 2007. I had just turned 13, the age where your curiosity sharpens like a knife, and you start noticing the weird silences in your family conversations. My parents were trying to patch things up with my dad's side, and that meant reconnecting with people we barely knew. So, for my birthday that year, they decided we'd spend the weekend at my grandparents' old farmhouse outside a small town in upstate New York called Elmbrook. My mom wasn't thrilled. I overheard her whisper to my dad late one night, "They're not normal, Tom. You know that house isn't right." I didn't understand what she meant and I didn't care. At 13, I was more focused on the Nintendo Wii I was expecting. My dad just brushed her off. "It's been too long. They're old. We should try." We arrived on a rainy Friday afternoon. The house stood like a ghost from another time. 2 stories, faded white siding, and black shutters barely hanging onto their hinges. Ivy strangled most of the outer walls. No lights on. No welcome mat. My grandmother opened the door before we even knocked. "Happy birthday, Jacob," she said, her voice like dry leaves rustling across pavement. She was frail-looking but sharp-eyed. Her face was lined like tree bark, and she wore a long dark green cardigan that swallowed her thin frame. My grandfather didn't speak much. He offered a tight-lipped smile and a nod before turning away and disappearing into the house. The inside smelled like old books and something else, something musty, metallic and sour. They had a strict way about them. Shoes off at the door. No running. No loud voices. No entering the attic under any circumstances. My mom gripped my shoulder tight when she heard that last part. Dinner was silent. No phones. No TV. Just the sound of forks against chipped plates and the clock ticking in the living room, a countdown. That night, as I unpacked in the guest room, my grandmother knocked gently and entered without waiting for a reply. "I have something for you," she said. It wasn't wrapped. It was an old leather-bound book, dusty and heavy. On the front was a faint design burned into the cover, some kind of circular symbol I didn't recognize. I figured it was just decoration. "What is it?" I asked. Her eyes didn't blink. "Family history," she said. "You're old enough now." I didn't question it. She left the room before I could say anything else. I flipped through the pages, blank at first, then scattered writing in fading ink, symbols, names, some in English, some not. A few pages had what looked like recipes or rituals. One page had a note in the corner: "Blood knows, blood remembers." I didn't think much of it, just creepy old people stuff. That night, I had a dream. I was standing in the hallway outside my room. The door to the attic was open and something was whispering my name over and over. I couldn't see anyone, but the air smelled like burning hair. When I woke up, the attic door was slightly ajar. I swear I didn't open it. Breakfast was quiet. Again, my dad kept trying to talk about baseball, the weather, anything to ease the tension. My grandmother ignored him. Mid-afternoon, the power went out. No storm, no warning. My dad went outside to check the breaker box. My grandfather followed without a word. I stayed inside with my mom. She looked anxious, eyes darting to the dark hallway where the attic door sat like a wound in the wall. "What's up there?" I asked. She took a deep breath. "Nothing you ever need to see." "Stay away from that door, Jacob." I nodded. I meant it. But something was pulling at me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing shuffling sounds upstairs, footsteps, then whispers, then soft scratching like someone dragging nails across old wood. At 12 a.m. I looked out the window. My grandmother was standing in the middle of the backyard, barefoot in the rain, staring up at the attic window. She stood there for nearly 30 minutes. I didn't sleep at all. We were supposed to leave that morning, but my dad couldn't find the car keys. He swore he left them in the kitchen counter. We tore the house apart, but they were gone. My grandfather said nothing. My grandmother only smiled. "We're not done yet," she said. I stayed in my room most of the day. I didn't even touch the book. Something about it made my skin crawl. That night, I locked the bedroom door. At 3 a.m., I woke up to someone whispering outside the door. "Jacob, come see. It's time." The voice was familiar. My grandmother, but distorted, like it was coming through water. I didn't answer. I stayed frozen under the blanket. Then I heard the doorknob turn. It was locked. A pause, then slow scratching against the wood. I couldn't breathe. After about a minute, the sound stopped. Then a loud thump against the door. I screamed. My parents came running. My dad found deep scratch marks on the outside of the door. 5 long grooves like claws. We packed and left before sunrise. My grandfather didn't say goodbye. My grandmother stood on the porch, holding the book in her hand, staring at me with eyes that no longer looked entirely human. We didn't talk about that weekend for a long time. My dad avoided every question. My mom got quieter. I started sleeping with the lights on. A few weeks later, a package arrived in the mail with no return address. It was the book. We burned it in the backyard that night. My mom insisted. She poured gasoline on it and lit the match herself. But when it burned, it screamed. Not a sound from the fire. An actual scream, high-pitched and horrible, like a woman in agony. My neighbors called the police, said they thought someone was being tortured in our backyard. The fire was gone when they arrived. Nothing left but ash and silence. My grandmother died suddenly, massive stroke, they said. But the coroner noted something strange. Her eyes were completely black when she passed out, no visible iris or pupil, just black. My grandfather disappeared 2 weeks later. They never found him. It's been years. I still have nightmares about the attic, about the voice, about the symbol. Last month, I saw it again on a page torn from an old book at a flea market in another state. Same symbol, same writing, same phrase, blood knows, blood remembers. I don't know what my grandmother gave me. I don't want to know. But I do know this. If your family has secrets, let them stay buried. Because sometimes digging into the past doesn't just uncover history. It opens doors that were never meant to be opened. And once they're open, they won't always close. It started with a phone call, one that came just after midnight. My mother had just put her phone down on the kitchen counter when it rang again. I watched her tired eyes glance at the screen. She hesitated, then picked it up. "It's your grandfather," she said to my father. Passing the phone to him, it was a hot coal. We had just moved into our new house in Anaheim. Boxes still cluttered the hallways, and my 10-year-old sister, Haley, and I, 12 at the time, were sleeping on an air mattress in the living room while our beds were being delivered. Dad sat down heavily on the edge of the couch and listened for a while. I saw his shoulders tense. When he finally hung up, he let out a long breath. That was Grandpa Thomas. Grandma Sylvia fell again. She's okay, just shaken up, but they're getting too old to manage on their own. It wasn't the first fall, and I knew what was coming. "We're going to need to visit," Mom said softly, already pulling out her planner. Haley and I exchanged a look. We'd only met our grandparents a few times, once when I was 6, and again when Haley was still in diapers. They lived far north, in a little forest town called Hollow Ridge, tucked between Humboldt redwoods. My parents had grown up there, but moved to the city long ago and never looked back. There was always an unspoken tension when it came to Grandpa Thomas and Grandma Sylvia. My dad didn't talk about it much, but from what little I knew, their relationship was strained. Still, a week later, with bags packed and reluctant goodbyes, Haley and I were sent to stay with them while my parents went on a trip to help sort legal and medical paperwork in San Diego. It was just supposed to be a week. 1 week in the woods with 2 elderly people we barely knew. I wish I could say that was worst of it. The drive to Holleridge took most of the day. The town was nothing like Anaheim, just a scattered collection of houses along 2 main roads, with fog that curled between the towering trees like something alive. The house was even stranger. Their property sat deep in the forest down a gravel driveway with moss-covered fences and vines that crawled up the front steps. It was a large old craftsman-style home. Beautiful in the way haunted houses are beautiful. The wood was worn and dark. The porch creaked and there was a weather vane that spun even without wind. When we arrived, Grandma Sylvia was already standing in the doorway, her thin arms wrapped in a shawl. Even though it was warm out, her smile was wide, but didn't quite touch her eyes. "Welcome home," she said, voice soft, but with a strange echo to it. Grandpa Thomas followed behind her, tall and gaunt, his eyes shadowed beneath his thick brows. He said nothing, just nodded. "Come in." "Come in," Grandma said, pulling Haley into a tight embrace. Her bony fingers lingered too long on Haley's back. "I didn't want to go in, but Dad gave me a nudge." "They're just old, Izzy," he whispered. "Be kind." Inside, the house smelled like mothballs and something else, something musty and metallic. The living room was filled with old furniture and doilies. There was no TV, no internet, and barely any cell reception. An ancient grandfather clock stood in the corner, its ticking loud and arrhythmic. Dinner that night was awkward. They served grey meatloaf and cold peas. Haley played with her food. I forced mine down, trying not to gag. Children these days, Grandpa said, watching us with a strange smirk. Always glued to their little devices. No one appreciates silence anymore. No one appreciates family, Grandma added, eyes locked on me. That night, Haley and I were put in a shared room upstairs. The wallpaper was peeling, the bed stiff, and outside the window, the tree swayed unnaturally, even though there was no breeze. I barely slept. The next day was worse. Weren't allowed to go outside unsupervised. Grandma told us the woods were dangerous and full of sinkholes and wild animals, but we hadn't seen a single animal since we arrived. I tried to call my mom, but the call dropped immediately. That's when I really started noticing things, like how all the clocks in the house were frozen at 3:12, how the mirrors were covered with cloths, how the photos on the walls, all black and white, had faces scratched out with a sharp object. Some were just completely blank, as if the people in them had been erased. Izzy, Haley whispered that night. I don't think there are grandparents. My heart stopped. I wanted to tell her she was imagining things, but I couldn't because I was starting to believe it, too. They looked like our grandparents, sounded like them mostly. But their eyes weren't right, too shiny, too alert, like something pretending to be human. 2 nights later, I found the basement door unlocked. It had been locked with 3 different deadbolts until then. I waited until everyone was asleep. Haley begged me not to go, but I had to. The basement was colder than it should have been. The air smelled of rust and decay. I found shelves of books, old leather-bound, written in strange languages, ritual diagrams, candles, bones, and a trunk. Inside were photos, real ones, of kids, dozens of kids. Some looked just like us, some had names scribbled on the back. All had one thing in common. Their eyes were blacked out with ink. There was also a journal. Most of it was unreadable, but the parts I could understand chilled me. They come to us lost, unwanted, perfect vessels. We welcome them. We become them. We feed. I didn't hear the door crack open behind me, but I felt the breath on my neck. You shouldn't be down here, Isabel, Grandpa Thomas said. Except it didn't sound like him anymore. The voice was too smooth, too practiced. I bolted past him up the stairs, slammed the door, and shoved a chair under the handle. The next morning, the door was gone. I mean it, gone. Like it had never existed. Just a smooth wall where the entrance to the basement had been. I didn't say anything to them. I just grabbed Haley and told her we needed to find a way out. We'll run down the road, I whispered. Hide in the woods until someone finds us. But when we tried to leave, the front door wouldn't open. I pulled at the knob until my fingers bled. The windows wouldn't shatter. The phone had no dial tone. We were trapped that night. Everything came to a head. We woke to the sound of chanting software rhythmic coming from the attic. We followed it, careful not to make noise. At the top of the stairs, I peeked through the cracked attic door. They were standing in a circle. Grandma, Grandpa, and 2 others wearing masks that looked like our faces. In the center of the room was a massive uncovered mirror. The glass shimmered like water, and in it I saw myself and Haley bound and screaming even though we were standing outside of it. Izzy, Haley whispered. They already took us. No, I said, panic tightening in my chest. That's what they want to do. We had to stop the ritual. There were no weapons, nothing heavy enough. So, I did the only thing I could. I ran in, grabbed one of the candles, and hurled it at the mirror. The glass cracked, not all the way, but enough to shatter the image. Inside, everything exploded in screams and wind. The attic walls seemed to fold in on themselves. The mirror wailed like a living thing, its cracks pulsing with black light. I grabbed Haley's hand, and we ran, wouldn't escape through the front. There was a hidden door behind a curtain in the study. I'd seen it the first day and assumed It led to a closet. It led to a stairwell, which spiraled down far below house's foundation. We didn't question it. We just ran. The tunnel went on for what felt like forever. We emerged in the woods, far from the house, panting and covered in dirt. By sunrise, we'd made it to the main road. A woman driving to work found us and called the sheriff. They never found the house. Not really. They found the property, found the steps leading up to nothing. The house was gone, as if it had never existed. The sheriff assumed it was an abandoned structure that collapsed. We were put in therapy. Our story written off as tremendous hallucination. But we remember every detail. Years later, I still dream of their eyes. Not the ones we knew, but the ones that watched us. The hollow eyes of whatever had taken their shape. I haven't been back to Hollow Ridge. Neither has Haley. And we never talk about mirrors. It's been over 10 years since we ran. Haley doesn't remember everything. Or maybe she chooses not to. She says her memories are blurry, like an old VHS tape. Static where the attic should be. Nothing but a scream she can place. But I remember too much. Sometimes I wonder if they ever truly let us go. I see them in strangers' faces, in flickers of reflection when I pass shop windows. Once, in a hotel room in Oregon, I caught a glimpse of myself in the bathroom mirror, and for half a second my reflection smiled, but I didn't. I smashed the glass with my elbow. I told the front desk it was an accident. It wasn't. A few months ago, Haley called me in the middle of the night. She was crying, panicked, said her daughter, 6 years old, was standing at the foot of her bed, pointing to the mirror. Said she whispered, "They're calling me by your name, Mommy." That was the same week I started hearing voices again. Only at night. Only when I'm half asleep. They whisper from the hallway, behind the closet, from the bathroom drain. "Isabel, come back." I tried to burn the symbol out of my memory, but it shows up anyway. In my dreams, on receipts, once, carved into the bark of a tree at a rest stop halfway across the country. I took a photo. When I checked my phone later, the picture was gone. Just black static. Last night, my hallway mirror was fogged up, but no one had used the bathroom. I wiped it clean, and for a moment, my reflection stood still as I moved. I haven't slept since. I don't think the ritual failed. I think it fractured. I think we didn't escape. We were split. The mirror didn't just show what they wanted to do. It took something. And now, the other part of us, the part that was bound in that glass, is still in there, screaming, reaching, trying to get out, or worse, trying to switch. ***, it's been over 10 years since Hollow Ridge, since Haley and I ran through that hidden stairwell, barefoot, blooded, and terrified, not daring to look back. Since the house vanished like smoke from the woods. But houses don't just disappear. Evil doesn't just evaporate. It festers. It waits. It remembers. I thought distance would protect us. I moved across the country, changed my name, cut ties with anyone connected to that town. I even stopped using mirrors. My apartment has none. I get ready in the morning by feeling my way through the motions. Toothbrush, eyeliner, ponytail. I avoid reflective windows. I don't take selfies, and still. It finds me. 3 months ago, I woke up with my hair soaking wet. My sheets were dry. The room was dry. But my hair clung to my neck like I had just come in from the rain. I could smell the pine from the Hollow Ridge woods. I could smell them. A few days after that, I started finding strange things at my doorstep. A pile of ash in the exact shape of the attic window. A dead bird with its eyes scratched out. A page, torn from an old book, crumpled, unburned at the edges, with the symbol. That cursed circular symbol carved into the margins, faint as a whisper. Underneath, in barely legible ink, she cracked the mirror. But it never broke, at first. I tried to convince myself it was a cruel prank. Some coincidence. Trauma playing tricks on my mind. I didn't tell anyone, not even Haley. She has a daughter now, Mila, sweet, bright, with her mom's eyes and none of her scars. I wanted to keep it that way, but then Mila started drawing pictures. Houses with no doors, people with black eyes, mirrors with something behind the glass. Haley said she was just imaginative. But one morning, Mila walked into the kitchen holding a small piece of broken glass. Her tiny fingers were bleeding. She looked up at Haley and said, "It told me I'm not the real one." We took her to the ER. Haley told the doctor she'd tripped, that the glass came from a broken frame in the hallway. I could see the lie in her face, and the fear beneath it. That night, she called me. Her voice was shaking. She sleepwalked. She said, "I found her in the bathroom, just standing there, staring into the mirror, but there's no mirror in that bathroom, Izzy. I took it down years ago." What was she looking at? I asked, already knowing I didn't want the answer. She was smiling. I flew to her house the next day. She didn't have to ask. It was in a quiet part of Oregon, miles from where we grew up. She did everything right, moved far, started over, changed her name too. Her house was small but warm. She'd filled it with soft rugs, plants, and child-safe corners, everything a good mother would do to erase the darkness of our past. But the past doesn't stay buried. I noticed the signs the moment I walked in, the smell of iron in the vents, the ticking of an old grandfather clock that hadn't worked in a decade. Every time I turned around, I felt like someone had just stepped out of sight. Mila avoided me. She kept glancing at the hallway mirror, even though Haley had covered it in cloth. At dinner, she whispered, "It doesn't like the cloth." I asked her what it was. "The lady with your face." That night, I sat in the hallway outside Millie's door. Keeping watch, I didn't sleep. At exactly 3:12 a.m., the mirror cloth fell to the floor on its own. There was no breeze. The mirror looked different. It didn't reflect the hallway. It showed the attic. That attic, from Hollow Ridge. I could see the cracked mirror, the candle circle, the twisted masks, and then I saw two figures standing just behind the glass. Haley and I, not as we are now, but as we were when we ran, frozen, eyes wide, still screaming. I staggered back. The mirror shimmered once, and then went black. I told Haley everything. She didn't argue. She just cried. "I think we left part of ourselves in that house," I said. "And now, it's trying to come back," she nodded. "I know. We made a choice." The next morning, we drove Mila to her godmother's house. We told her it was a sleepover. We kissed her and promised we'd be back tomorrow. But Haley and I both knew there might not be a tomorrow. We drove back to Hollow Ridge. The town was mostly gone. The forest had reclaimed the roads. The gas station was boarded up. Nature had erased everything, except the land. We found the spot. The moss-covered stairs leading up to nothing. The grass was dead in a perfect square, like something heavy had once stood there and only recently moved. The earth felt wrong beneath our feet. Soft, to soft. We brought the book, or what was left of it. We brought matches, salt, rope, old ritual guides I'd collected over the years. Maybe none of it would work. Maybe it wasn't real magic. But it was all we had. The forest was quiet. Too quiet. We stood in the center of that empty foundation, hand in hand. "Izzy," Haley whispered. "Do you hear it?" I did. A faint ticking, like a grandfather clock buried beneath the soil, growing louder. Then we should have known it wouldn't be that simple. When we stepped into the clearing where the house once stood, it was like the world paused. The forest didn't move, not the branches, not the wind. Even the air felt held in suspension, like the woods were watching, holding their breath. The mirror didn't reflect us anymore. It reflected what we left behind. Not just memories, not just trauma. Versions of ourselves. Trapped. Younger. Flickering. Screaming. Haley single quote says reflection clawed at the invisible barrier from the inside, mouth wide in a silent wail. Mine stood just behind her, A hand pressed against the glass, eyes wide and black, like ink had been poured into them. The moment we stepped closer, our phones went dead. The salt circle we laid earlier had already been disturbed, dragged outward, like something had slithered across it. I held the old book close to my chest. Not the burned one, the copy I had found at a flea market 3 states away. The one I never should have touched. The one that somehow smelled like the basement in Hollow Ridge. Inside was a page I hadn't seen before. It wasn't written. It was drawn. A door with no handle. A mirror with no frame. 2 girls. One inside, one out. And a single phrase etched in blood red ink. One must remain, for the other to leave. I felt sick. Haley didn't say a word. She just stared at the mirror, pale and trembling. I could see the decision forming in her eyes. No, I whispered, stepping in front of her. Don't even think about it. She didn't look at me. Izzy, she's my daughter. If this thing follows me home again, we'll find another way. There isn't one, her voice cracked. You read the same page, we argued, but it didn't matter. Because the mirror moved. It shivered, then floated backwards, like being pulled on invisible strings. The forest bent around it, trees warping, shadows elongating, until we were standing in a twisted clearing that shouldn't have existed. In the center, the mirror, now embedded in the trunk of an ancient, gnarled tree. Its surface shimmered, like oil, no longer showing us, but showing Myla, alone, in her room, staring into a mirror we didn't know she had. She turned, looked at us, whispered something. We couldn't hear her. Then, another Myla stepped into the frame behind her. Same hair, same pajamas, same face, but the eyes. Wrong. Pure black. Haley screamed. She reached forward, and the tree swallowed her arm. I grabbed her, pulled with everything I had, but it wasn't enough. The mirror flared blinding white. The book burst into flames in my hand. The forest screamed. I don't mean wind through trees. I mean it screamed. They wanted her. They remembered. Then I saw it. On the ground near the twisted roots, a second symbol, carved into stone. Faint, but still glowing. A protection rune, incomplete. I dropped to my knees and traced it with ash and salt. My fingers bled from the sharp edges, but I didn't care. As I completed the symbol, the forest shuddered. The mirror shattered, not like glass, more like bone, a sound like 1,000 memories breaking all at once, high-pitched and wet and final. Haley collapsed to the ground beside me, gasping, eyes wild. But alive. The forest was suddenly silent. The tree was just a tree again. The mirror was gone, but something had gotten out first. We didn't speak for a long time. We just sat in the dirt, holding hands, covered in blood and salt, and whatever passed for ash in that place. Eventually, the sun came up, pale, cold, but real. We walked out of the woods in silence, found a gas station, called Miller's godmother. She picked up the phone, trembling. Miller's fine, she said. She slept through the night, but this morning. She paused. She asked me if you'd made it out okay. That night, we returned to the city. Haley hugged Myla like she'd never let go again. I moved in with them, just until we're sure, I told myself, just until the dreams stop. But deep down, I know, this isn't over, because 2 nights ago, I heard Myla talking in her sleep. I leaned in close, and I swear to God. She whispered, one must remain, for the other to leave.